Cannibal Holocaust is a troublesome film that I've wrestled with the idea of making a video about a few times, but I feel conflicted just when it comes to the subject matter alone, based on the inherent content that just feels sickening and evil upon a surface level viewing when you look at it for the first time. But at the same time, I feel like it's a film worth talking about because at the same time, it does have some notable points being made in a surprisingly coherent way. While Cannibal Holocaust is never going to be my favorite film of all time, let alone being even enjoyable in the slightest, I do think that it is an unexpectedly well-made film with a clear, concise agenda made throughout. And still, also, while Cannibal Holocaust will unfortunately forever be known as that movie with the real-life animal torture in it, which I just want to put on the record fucking sickens me, it does, as a film, actually, even beyond that, still have quite a bit of substance behind it, beyond that shallow exterior of shock and awe. Now, in my viewings of this film, I will say that I have never watched through with the infamous tortoise scene or any of the other memorable standouts when it comes to real life animal on-screen violence. I don't want to see that. I don't want to be any part of that. I do not condone it. I do not support that. I hate that that is part of this film. Unashamedly, I've always skipped through that shit. I don't need to see it. I don't think it makes me some super tough guy, some good film smart man or whatever to sit through that bullshit. I don't think it's necessary to understand what's going on either, and I hate that. That being said though, of course, this is really the reason why the movie garnered so much attention to begin with, and I have to admit is the reason why I've ever heard of it to begin with, because you know me, I don't necessarily just stumble across a very low budget Italian 1980s pre-found footage era found footage film every day. This isn't exactly up my alley. I didn't just stumble across it, you know. I'd heard of this film, I'd heard of the reputation, and I went in with an open mind years ago when I was a teenager, when I was still very curious about watching movies that would be on like the most disturbing movies types of lists and stuff, and I wanted to prove that I could handle that kind of shit. Definitely a phase that I went through, and yeah, when I first watched Cannibal Holocaust, that is where I was in life, and so I watched it with an open mind. And going in, I gotta say that I was never expecting this film to be anything more than schlock. I thought it was maybe gonna be a bit silly. I never actually expected anything legitimately shocking, let alone anything that was actually thought-provoking. I was in it for the thrill because I was a dumb teenager, you know, but there I was all those years ago sitting there watching as I came to the conclusion that unfortunately, and still to this day, I think Cannibal Holocaust is regrettably and frustratingly a good film, and let's talk about why. Cannibal Holocaust is a found footage film that is much more talky, much more modern feeling, and much more responsible than one might expect. It's not a campy horror of the 80s like the poster might suggest. There's not a whole lot of fun to be had here, but there is actually some thought-provoking material. The film tells the story of a crew in the media as they discover the lost footage of an unfinished documentary in the Amazon rainforest, made by a film crew who had since been missing for months. What they find on these tapes uncovers a horrible truth about the filmmakers themselves and violently reveals their reckless behavior. From then on, the film does show us said footage, but mainly the bulk of the story revolves around the tough decision in whether or not to make this particular information public by televising said footage. There's a lot of discussion about whether it's right or wrong, or whether it's their obligation or not to do so. Is exposing the true nature of the documentary crew something that is an absolute must? Look, probably not. Is it something that should probably be done morally? Yeah, probably. Is exposing the cannibalistic tribe who only act in violence when it's in retaliation going to help anyone either? Well, probably not, but do they deserve that coverage? You know, that's the kind of thing that this film makes you ask, and whether or not it's the right thing to do. And most importantly, how is this footage going to affect the people who see this at home? Is this going to do more damage than good? See, these are the sorts of questions that the crew here have to ask themselves. Revolutionary for its time, the film takes the morals of its characters and makes us really question things about our own predetermined ideas about those who are different from ourselves. The film deals with the idea of evil and nature versus nurture, as well as racism and cultural differences, and most of all, ignorance regarding all that. And if only it didn't fucking include that real life torture of animals that this movie fucking does that makes me hate it so damn much. One of which that I haven't mentioned in detail, just by the way, is this one where they literally pull a fucking tortoise apart. They like take the shell out and just, they pull the freaking thing apart. And it's all shown on screen graphically as, yeah, they rip off the shell. It's bloody, it's disgusting, it's unnecessary, and it's real. It's very real. And it's so wrong and so frustrating. And I hate that it's connected to the film at all. But of course, being a film like Cannibal Holocaust, this isn't the only controversy that ever came around it. The film also isn't helped at all when it probably also comes off as pretty offensive when it comes to the depiction of the indigenous tribes people as well. Changing tone for just a sec here though, Cannibal Holocaust is a film that has strung many a controversy over its filmic life, but most interestingly and most idiotically, I have to say as well, my favorite story is when it comes to the behind the scenes aspect of the film and what happened after its release, in which many of the viewers were so convinced by the filmmaking that they thought that the director Ruggero Deodato was a straight up murderer. The human deaths in the film were of course acted and faked, but in the end this didn't stop accusations as things went awry. Deodato was arrested for murder and had to plead in court to convince everyone that he didn't in fact kill any of the actors involved. Facing life in prison, the situation was only exacerbated by the fact that he made the actors involved in the film sign a contract in which made it so that they couldn't appear in any media within 1 year after the film's release, in an attempt to sell authenticity and to blur the lines between the media and reality. The combination of the realistic looking violence on screen and the inconvenient disappearance of the actors had the courts convinced of Deodato's guilt, and he had to resort to desperately trying to contact the actors to get them to just like present themselves, you know, alive and well. Eventually this did result in the criminal charges being dropped, but it's still a hilarious bit of background story for this film. Getting back to the context of the actual film itself though, I think it takes a surprisingly effective look at the difference between Western civilization and the mostly unscathed tribes of the Amazon rainforest and wherever else in the world tribes like these may reside. The film follows the original film crew that went out there and demonstrates how, though the tribesmen of the Yukumo tribe in the film may have been brought up to live rougher, more savage lives in the eyes of the visiting city folk, that true monstrosity can really be found right here in our own backyard. The saving grace for Cannibal Holocaust, in my opinion, is that the tribes people are definitely not the villains of this film and were never the ones that we were really supposed to be afraid of. You don't have to go out to some faraway foreign rainforest to find people who are willing to commit acts of evil. No, they are all around us. It's kind of the genius of the film and a bit of an unexpected twist, at least at the time, where instead of the tribes people killing the film crew unprovoked and being a simplistic horror film warning about the dangers of like foreigners or whatever racist narrative that they could have pushed in this era, no, instead they actually do definitively show that the film crew are the ones who strike first. And in the end, the film dares to ask the question, who are the real savages among these people? And who defines what society is and what the right way of living is as well? Because as the film crew gets to see how the tribes people are living and everything, obviously they judge this as like wrong, and they judge this as like, I don't know, they laugh at it, they think it's funny, they think it's silly and whatever, and obviously their way of life is the correct way. And it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. It's like the way that we were raised, that's what you think is like right or whatever. And I feel like Cannibal Holocaust, surprisingly, despite everything, challenges those ideas and kind of goes against tradition. And we see an example of this earlier in the film before finding out the truth about the film crew's footage, when our protagonist Munro goes to the rainforest himself and gains the trust of the native people by respecting them and, you know, having an open mind. He doesn't just go in guns blazing or whatever. He doesn't go in antagonistically. He's just a friendly guy, and he gets friendliness, you know, it comes back to him. Acting cautiously, we see that if the original film crew had gone in, documented everything, and got out without any further altercations, likely none of the violence that takes place in this film ever would have. But for the sake of provocation and getting the footage they need to push the narrative they're trying to sell, the film crew wrongly prod, bully, and disturb the natural order to get the reactions that they want. And this even plays as a pretty clever retroactive commentary on reality TV that had yet to hit the mainstream in the next decade or so, which is another aspect that makes the film weirdly and surprisingly influential beyond its early day footage of just being a found footage style filmmaking like movie to begin with. You know, that was pretty revolutionary for its time as well. That's not something that, you know, people were that familiar with. No, this wasn't the first found footage film ever, but it's definitely one of the notable ones that made a name for itself, for better or worse. And to further drive the commentary point home, the executives reviewing the footage in the film argue that the harsh realities depicted will sensationalize and titillate a thriving audience ready to witness such cruelty, which in their minds will be great for their ratings. And you know, that's just another example of evil that the film depicts. You know, albeit a much less harsh version of that, because you know, the executives aren't going out of their way and physically harming anyone. But still, the corporate greed comes through, and it's still disturbingly relevant to this day. In context of the story though, we see as the original film crew goes about disturbing order as much as possible, for no real reason beyond their own amusement. From the comparable minor act of arrogantly and unnecessary shooting at birds in trees when they first arrive, to later on sexually assaulting and even killing people, the film crew are clearly arrogant, uncaring, and most of all, unforgiving and inhumane. When we witness moments like these, and other moments where they purposefully kill the tribe's people's livestock and then laugh in their faces, and burn their villages down, with the intention of framing this as an attack from an opposing tribe known as the Yanomamo tribe nearby. The film crew go about causing as much chaos as possible, and we witness it all, and a lot of it is really, really hard to watch, and the sheer disrespect upon their fellow man is just nothing short of sickening and shocking and surprising. You just can't believe anybody would really do this. And even though this is fictional, there's still a level of that that's grounded, and even though you can't believe it, in a way, you kind of can, because there are people out there who would be willing to act this kind of way. And that's just really the horrible kind of truth about Cannibal Holocaust, as it shines a reflection on ourselves. Cannibal Holocaust is definitely a film aiming to be provocative, and it achieves it, though I must admit, at times anyway, it's at a very surface level, in which I mean that there's not really any meaning to what is happening apart from trying to get the point across, which I'm conflicted about. See, showing the atrocities is kind of vital in terms of, you know, getting the idea of the brutality of the story across, but at the same time, a lot of the film's time is spent showing the film crew doing heinous things and laughing about it, and then just doing it all over again, till it gets to the point where we're like, yeah, okay, I've seen this, and I get it, and I don't really need to see anymore. By the end of the film though, the film crew have screwed around with the native tribes so much that eventually they finally retaliate and just kill them all in disturbingly satisfying ways. The true heart of the film here, I think, is that we've been so swayed by the actions of the film crew that we are now kind of pretty okay with seeing them get horrifically killed. This is another little moment of society being reflected onto us with Cannibal Holocaust. I believe that this is really begging its viewers to ask ourselves whether or not it's okay that these people are being killed in the first place, because do they deserve it, and does anyone? If anybody deserves it, it's probably these people. No part of this film is really enjoyable, and I wouldn't call Cannibal Holocaust entertaining either. I find it's a film for only a very select few people who can stomach it, and regrettably, I think I am one of them. While I don't find that the movie is something that I'm going to be rewatching numerous times, and I definitely wouldn't call this film a crowd pleaser, it is one that I think is worth watching at least once if you can get past a lot of the content itself. The point of the film overrides the sheer grossness to me. However, if you think that the film is just pure evil, well, you're not alone. Throughout the years, it had gone through various bans and censorship. It was banned upon release in many countries, including right here in Australia and America, before later gaining releases in the later 80s in both countries. There's an argument to be made that the message doesn't justify the content either, and there's an argument to be made that Cannibal Holocaust is within itself, much like the film crew within it, looking to provoke its audiences and exploit the themes depicted within, and not much more. And look, it's not a film that is largely respected, and I'm not even very proud of having seen it to begin with, let alone making a fucking video about it. It's a grimy, disgusting, and maybe even morally apparent film that's challenging in many ways as it is unpleasant. But I argue that it's not without some semblance of thought, and it's not as pointless or exclusively out for shock value as one might think upon just looking at the poster and title alone. I think that this film does a lot more than it gets credit for. Cannibal Holocaust is a surprisingly still relevant film to this day that unfortunately impresses me in a certain way, as the main crux of it, I think, is when the ultimate decision is made within the film to scrap the footage and destroy it so that nobody ever sees it. A decision that ultimately drives the point home as to just how disturbing it all is and just how pointless it all is. See, by erasing that footage, it basically just gets rid of everything. The evidence is gone, the people's lives are gone, and in the end, as far as we're concerned here in Western civilization, nothing ever happened and it doesn't matter. And that, I think, is what is most disturbing about this film. The eradication of lives. I don't think Cannibal Holocaust is entirely clueless about what it's suggesting here, and I don't think it's entirely made up of pure schlock either. I think the film has important things to say about censorship, about ruthlessness, about understanding one another, and I think it does it all in its own devilishly ironic way, presented within a disturbing and purposefully confrontational film that cannibalizes its own ideas of what is and and isn't okay to show on screen. I think it's hypocritical, but in a really clever way. And I think it's a lot more intelligent than the title, or poster, or reputation suggests. While I don't think that I particularly condone the film for its choices or how it was filmed, and I think that it definitely has like a certain edgelord kind of mentality to it that is fundamentally off-putting, I do think that Cannibal Holocaust, though not morally superior than frickin' anything else, I do think that the film is at the very least trying to do something with its message, and is one of the better films that you will find on a top 10 most disturbing movies list type of video. And I unfortunately think it's kind of impressive. Okay, so that's about all that I had to say about this film. I've been like unsure about whether or not to make a video about this movie for ages, just because, you know, it's super fucked up in a certain way and everything. Also, it's probably not like the most popular thing to begin with, you know, you're not just gonna click on this or whatever. But here we are, I did it, I talked about it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and please, before you go, remember to do the things and all that stuff, and I'm gonna go. Bye.